Chapter 6. Driving Hogs to Market, early 1860s. Root, hog, or die. Defend on what you find. It's root, hog, or die for all in these hard times. I have been intrigued to know more about the story I heard my dad tell in my early years of Alexander Harness going on a hog drive, taking them down near Little Rock, Arkansas. While my dad had few details, through some research, I have found information that helped me to tell the story in this chapter. Some roads in the Ozarks today are named pig trails because they are steep and crooked. I'm sure there were many pig trails in those days, as improved roads would not come for many years to most of the Ozark Hills. Prior to the Civil War, virtually every citizen of Searcy County was a farmer. Nearly 400 farmers were listed in 1860, along with 1 carpenter, 9 blacksmiths, 1 millwright, 2 school teachers, 3 wagon makers, 2 merchants, 1 doctor, and a gunsmith. None were considered overly prosperous, even by Arkansas's limited standards of the day. The farmers were mostly yeomen, raising crops mainly for their own use and heavily supplementing their diets with wild game. Many grew tobacco for bartering or personal use, and corn was the predominant row crop. Little to none of the land grew cotton or rice. Alec and Jenny Renfro Harness became parents of a son born to them on October 28, 1856. They named him Martin Van Buren Josiah Harness, and he was called Mart for short. Jenny had just turned 22 years old when Mart was born. 2 years later, she gave birth to a second son who they named William Alexander Harness and called him Billy. It is estimated that about 40% of babies born at that time did not live past their 5th birthday. While maternal deaths today are seldom, many mothers perished giving birth in those days. Being a young father, Ellis Harness must have felt blessed having 2 healthy boys and a strong mother. He worked hard to feed and support them. Both the Appalachians and the Ozarks had very limited cropland, making it easier to let hogs scavenge through the hills and fend for food. The practice was known as root, hog, or die. Supplementing swine with corn until the acorns fell in the fall allowed the farmer to get them to come to the feed trough. Calling the hogs was done in a variety of entertaining ways and contests, and it became the cheer for the University of Arkansas ball teams. Hogs that were out ranging in the woods soon learned their call to come to the feed. Woo pig suey was a common call used to alert pigs to come running to the hog trough for a treat. Woo pig suey was repeated as the caller listened for the grunting of hogs rushing toward him. Farmers made ear notches to keep up with their herd when they got mixed in with other livestock by using a knife to make a split or crop in the ear of the pig. The Harness brand was a split in the right ear and a crop in the left ear. Like the branding of cows, the markings identified the owner. When time came for hogs to be harvested, they were caught in makeshift pens where some were slaughtered for personal use, but extra hogs were available to be sold or traded. A live hog was valuable, and the fatter, the better. Hog fat, called lard, was tasty and used for cooking and seasoning foods. Acorns made the lard and meat darker, but a corn-fed hog had whiter lard and sweeter meat. Hog buyers were interested in year-old pigs that could be walked for miles to market. There was no way to transport livestock in the hills other than by walking them to market. It was commonplace to meet drovers on the road with hogs and other kinds of livestock and fowl, all being marched in groups to places where they could be slaughtered or transported to their destination. One might have seen ducks, geese, turkey, hogs, cows, and sheep all being herded down the road or through the streets of towns, it was America, and animals crisscrossed paths with people on every level. Like it or not, your next ride, dollar, or meal was made by sharing the road with messy herds and flocks. Alec Harness was given the opportunity to gather up a herd of hogs from the local Searcy County farmers and march them south through the hills down to the market about 100 miles away. It took a group of drivers to move hogs along to the next overnight stop. Along the route were places, about every 10 miles, called wagon stands, where drivers and livestock could rest up and be fed. America produced more pork than any other meat in the mid-1800s. Roughly 5 times more hogs were driven to market than any other animal. A settler from Tennessee, Benjamin Thomas, described Searcy County near the present site of Leslie in 1849. At that time, the country was very thinly settled, men going 6 and 7 miles to house raisings and log rollings. The nearest mill was on Big Creek, 12 or 15 miles away. Our only market for agricultural goods was Little Rock. All the surplus hogs were driven there, a trip of from 18 to 25 days. After hogs were driven down there and killed, the man got 42 cents per hog, came home with a pocket full of money. Our groceries were all purchased at Little Rock for the coming year. In more modern times, Hollywood romanticized the cattle drives of the American cowboy and the horned cows from the plains. Yet it was the hog that made it to many more tables in America than the cow. Here is a description by one researcher about the caravan. Pig drivers followed fairly standard protocols. The drover, on horseback, rode at the front of a herd that might range from a few hundred to 1,000 or more hogs. Following behind on foot were his employees called drovers, usually one for every 100 pigs. The drover shouted, "Soo-ee, Subboy," or "Ho-o-o-you." Driving hogs along roads took patience, as they would find mud and water to wallow in. As time progressed, they settled into the routine, and it got easier as they were driven farther and farther from home. Lame or insubordinate pigs were often traded for room and board at the wagon stand. While the men rested and ate some grub, the hogs were generally fed some corn to give them energy for the next day. Imagine the sounds of smacking, grunting, and chomping that a large herd would make, and the smell they would emit. Although the squealing subsided as the men snored and all dreamed of their own hog heaven. The time Ellis Harness took with the others to get to North Little Rock was probably between 3 and 4 weeks. I assume there were pens at the Arkansas River where the hogs would have been loaded onto riverboats and moved down to the south where cotton plantations needed pork to feed slaves. Many hogs may have been butchered, salted, and placed into wood barrels to be sold as salt pork. Slave owners believed that keeping the workers in the field and not caring for hogs was a better use of time. The practice was dominant before the Civil War, and even afterwards there was a demand for pork from sharecroppers. Hog drives and using pork was much greater and cheaper than beef. Alex and the herders who had walked the 100 miles then had to walk back home. The return trip was faster without the pigs. They probably encountered other drovers along the way and traded stories. I'm sure the men were eager to get to their homes and families and bring back some needed supplies and money. Along the way, Alec became increasingly sick. He pressed on hard to keep up, as he wanted to be home where he could rest and be taken care of. Making it as far as Bear Creek, he had to stop at a home short of his cabin and ask for help. He was taken in and given whatever home treatment was available. His condition was thought to be a serious case of pneumonia. Medicine and treatment were still in the dark ages, and many cures often only added to the affliction. About 1 in 4 who contracted the disease died from it in that era. Some think that Jenny was called to his side as his breathing was labored. I hope she was there to comfort the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with. Elix slipped away from this life on February 4th, 1860, at age 24. While he met his Maker in rest, Jenny faced the reality of being a widow and mother of 2 boys, ages 1 and 3 years old. She had an uncertain future in a world that seemed to have very few options. The pain and fear that surrounded Jenny was preparation for many difficult years to follow. Trials sharpened her faith to trust God for the unseen provisions she needed to raise her boys. The body of Alexander Harness was washed down and made to appear as if he was sleeping abed. A wake was held for family and friends who gathered and mourned, hoping to give some comfort to Jenny. In Ireland and Scotland, the practice of a wake was to stay up all night with the dead. Given the Scottish ancestry of Jenny, I expect that tradition was held. I imagine her sitting next to his bed throughout the night, sorting her emotions and feelings. Her wounded heart was raw and aching from the shock of a world without Ellis. Jenny was forced to be a pioneer widow and raise her 2 boys. The next morning, men volunteered to go down to the Bear Creek Cemetery and dig a hole 6 feet deep. Others took lumber and prepared a box for his body to be placed in. Some cooked food to be shared with the family and those attending Jenny. I expect the young boys, Mart and Billy, had no idea what was taking place, but were troubled by the laments of their mother and others mourning the passing of Ellis. The saddest moment in life is the death of a loved one. Even Jesus wept at the passing of his friend Lazarus. Such hard times were common, and it only got worse as war approached to divide the United States of America. Many new cemeteries would be created to rest the bodies of the fallen. Being in early February, I imagine Elix's burial was a very cold day. No day is good when you put a loved one into the ground. Covering your dear one with cold sod on a chilling day had to seem like such abandonment of the dead. In time, a headstone was placed as a reminder of the life of an earthly pilgrim that was just passing through this world. The first Harness was now laid to rest in the Bear Creek Cemetery. Reflection. Jenny Harness was first without a husband for 3 to 4 weeks as Ellick left to earn them some money. Then watching her husband suffer and die, followed by witnessing his burial, must have been the loneliest and darkest days of her life. By focusing on raising her boys, she found grace and strength to bear her burdens, one day at a time. The Lord is near to those who have a broken heart, and saves such as have a contrite spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Psalm 34:18-19.